All right, in this video I'm really going to go through our notes that we're going to be taking for section 1.2 in your Algebra 1A class. So what you really need is you're going to need your notebook, and you will need some things to write with, and you do need colors in this lesson. So make sure you get at least 3 different colors because we will actually use them. So these are the 3 that I'm going to use. It doesn't matter which ones you choose, but you will need something with colors. And then the 2 sheets that you're going to need, one looks kind of like this, and the other one looks like this. So go ahead and take a minute to get those cut and ready. And the 2, so you're going to need flaps on this one, and also for this one. And then we're going to fill these out together and talk through these examples. So once you have those ready, go ahead and turn to a new page in your notebook. So in our last page we dealt with solving simple equations. Right, so I'm going to put both of these note catchers on the same page, just to save some space and also as just a good reminder. So the first one we're really going to be looking at is this one that's actually blank once you fold it, but it looks kind of like this once you open up the inside. So let's look at this top one first. Here we're going to be combining like terms. So we're going to go ahead and write that out. So combining like terms becomes really important here when we start working on these learning targets. And I want to go ahead and show you the learning target. We only have one learning target today. So on your learning target sheet, we're really solving here some multi-step equations. We're going to be working on this for a couple of days. So we're going to be working on these top 3 actually. The first 3 sections deal with these top 3 kind of in a roundabout way, all of them. So make sure that we're working on these 3 here. Okay. So when we're combining like terms, you'll notice if you flip this open, we have 3 different steps that we're going to be working on. So the first step is we're going to separate all the terms. And the easiest way to separate them is with a line. So I'm going to go ahead and use a different colored pen and just kind of make straight up and down marks. So you'll notice the important part is that the sign goes with the term that follows it. Okay? And that really does matter because that'll change where things go and how we combine them and what it actually does to it. So I've separated all my terms using that vertical line. So the second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight or color the terms that are the same. So that's where our colors come into play. So I'm going to start with purple, and I'm going to start with A just because that's the first thing that pops up. So I see this term has an A, this term has an A, this one has an A, and there's an A at the very end. Now if yours didn't show up, just go ahead and write that in. So now I'm going to use blue. So I'm going to use blue for anything that doesn't have a variable with it, which would be those 3 right there. And then I'm going to use my orange for anything that has a B with it. So now that I've gone ahead and colored all of my terms so that are the same, I'm going to combine terms. Okay, so first I'm going to start with my A's, and it doesn't matter which order you start or you go in. So I see I have -5 plus 3 plus 1 minus 1. Well, I know that a plus 1 and a minus 1 will automatically get rid of each other. So now I'm looking at a -5 plus 3, which would give me a -2A. So now I'm going to go to my orange and look at my B's. So I see I only have 2, so I have a -4 plus 6, which would give me plus 2B. And now my blue, all of my these are called constants because they don't have a variable. So I have -2 plus 12, which gets me to a +10, plus 1 more, which gives me to plus 11. So I've combined all of the terms with their similar things. Okay? So now let's look at this bottom. There's one more thing. So now we can also add in the distributive property. Okay, so the distributive property. So we'll see here that I have a bunch of different things, but I've got some stuff outside of my parentheses. So the first step when I have some things outside my parentheses is multiply everything by what is outside. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and use a pen to show that. So even though this 6 is after the parentheses, we work it the same. So I have to multiply the 6 times the m, n times the negative 2, n times the positive 3. So I end up with 6m. 6 times the negative 2 is a negative 12. 6 times a 3n is a positive 18n. So now I have to do the same thing with this second grouping of terms. But here I want you to notice that this is a negative 4 that I'm distributing in. This is the step that gets missed a lot, is that this is a negative. So I distribute that negative 4 in to both of those terms. So I have a negative 4 times n, which is a negative 4m. And then I have a negative 4 times a negative 1, which gives me a positive 4. So now the second step when I'm dealing with the distributive property is to actually just follow all of these same steps above. So we're just going to write that down. Follow steps above. Okay, so we first start by separating each term. Then we go ahead and color the terms that are the same. And then again, for this example, order is not going to matter at all, so we're just going to start at the beginning. So 6m minus 4m gives me 2m. A negative 12 plus a positive 4 gives me a negative 8. And then there was only 1 with an n, so I can go ahead and write that in, plus 18n. So I've not only just combined the terms, but I've also simplified using my distributive property. Okay, so that's going to come into play a lot here in the next bunch of lessons, is combining those terms. Okay, so now we've gotten this one, we can put that aside, and now we're really going to dive into the solving different equations. Okay, so here we're looking at specifically two-step equations. And next time we're going to continue into some three-step equations. So my first example here, we're not dealing with any fractions. So what we're going to do here together is we're going to fill out this right side together, and you are going to spend some time filling out this left side following the example that we just did. Okay, so when I am solving these two-step equations, I want to think back to my order of operations, and I want to work backwards. Okay, so think of those properties and work backwards. So I see I'm multiplying and I'm subtracting. So the first thing I would have to undo, and that's what we're doing, is we're undoing these things, is I would have to undo that subtraction. And I undo subtraction by adding. And I know that when I do something to one side, I have to do it to the other side as well. So a negative 11 plus 11 cancels each other out. 31 plus 11 is 42. So now I have 6x equals 42 because I bring down my 6x. Well, now I see the only thing being done is multiplication. So to undo multiplication, I go ahead and I divide. So 42 divided by 6, x equals 7. So now I can go ahead and double check by plugging 7 back into where my x is and solving there. Okay, so you always want to think of the order of operations backwards. So there's our first example. So the next example is we're going to add or subtract first. And you'll see the difference here is I have a fraction. But where the fraction is really matters because it's all by itself, right? And this 12 is happening after the fraction, or even before the fraction, but it's not part of the fraction. So again, I know to undo subtraction, I add, and what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I end up with x divided by 3 equals a negative 2. Well, now since I'm dividing, to undo division, I multiply by that denominator. And when I'm doing this, I always have to multiply by the value that's in the denominator, not what's in the numerator. So those cancel each other out. So x would equal a negative times a positive is a negative. 2 times 3 is 6. So there we go. So now what you'll notice about this final example that's different is everything is dealing with that fraction. So I have to go ahead and I undo that first before I can deal with this adding 3. So to undo division, or this fraction, I multiply. And what I said before is you have to multiply by the denominator. So I multiply both sides by 6. So that will cancel. So now I have x plus 3 equals 12. Well, now I have something that looks sort of similar to this first example that I can just undo that addition by subtracting. So I see that x equals 9. So now that we've followed through some different examples of solving these two-step equations, now you have a couple that I want you to try. When you're doing this, I need to see each of your steps that you take so that we can make sure and we can get this really super solid. So now to get these in our notebook, what we want to do is these I'm going to put on the same page. So I have two folding out books just like this, so that I can see I've got combining like terms, I've got the distributive property, and then I've got my examples. The other thing that we need to kind of discuss from this section that's involved is finding the mean of a number. Okay? Now this is something you've learned before, so if this is kind of a like, I don't really remember the mean, go ahead and make sure you put this in your book. So the mean is also the average. So whenever you see these two words together, they are the same thing. So when I find the mean or the average, I take the total, or the sum, which means I add, of all the data, and I divide it by the number of data points. So for example, I'm going to show you the example that's actually in your textbook for this. Okay, so here's the example that's in your textbook. So it says, use the table to find the number of miles you need to bike on Friday so that the mean number of miles biked per day is 5. Well, here they're giving us some information. So based on this formula for the mean or the average, I know that I have to add all of my data together and divide it by the number of data points. Well, so here's where we do this. So I add all of my data together, which includes that variable, and I divide it by the number of data points. So then once I simplify that a little bit, look at this, looks like just like our third example that we just walked through in our notes. So now I can go ahead and multiply and then subtract to get my final answer. I just wanted to do a real quick review on what mean equals, because you're going to have some problems about that. So now that you've worked through your notebook, so make sure now that you can work on your homework, you've got your notebook with you, and you also have your textbook so that you can look at those examples if you really want to. And as always, double check with me, ask me, email me whenever you get stuck on anything.